Hello, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar and cooking demo. We're so glad you've joined us. My name is Alana Goldstein, and I work at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency on federal efforts to reduce wasted food. Today, I'm joined by 4 colleagues who are going to show easy actions you can take to reduce wasted food at home. We want you to walk away today with practical tips and inspiration to get started. First, we'll hear from Andrea Collins. Andrea is a Sustainable Food Systems Specialist at the Natural Resources Defense Council, and she focuses on making our food system more efficient, sustainable, and equitable. Andrea will share resources from SaveTheFood.com with tips for reducing food waste in our kitchen. Next will be Allison Muntford, founder and CEO of Ends and Stems, a meal planning service designed to reduce household food waste and stop the effects of climate change. Chef Allison will present in the kitchen to show you how to use ingredients you may find in your fridge as part of the meal plan process and how to cook with ends and stems. Then we'll hear from Brenda Platt, director of the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, Composting for Community Project, which is advancing composting to enhance soils, protect the climate, and reduce waste. Brenda will cover the why, the what, and the how to compost at home. And lastly, Jonathan Deutsch, PhD and certified research chef and professor in the Department of Food and Hospitality Management in the College of Nursing and Health Professions at Drexel University, also director of the Drexel Food Lab. Jonathan is president of the Upcycled Food Foundation and a former James Beard Foundation Impact Fellow, leading a national curriculum on food waste reduction for chefs and culinary educators. Throughout the webinar, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will have time to answer them after the presentations, and we look forward to having a great discussion. So let's get started. And you can go to the next slide. Thanks. In the United States, 30 to 40% of all available food goes uneaten through loss or waste. This includes unsold food from retail stores, plate waste, which is food that's been served but hasn't been eaten, uneaten prepared food, kitchen trimmings from restaurants, cafeterias, and households, byproducts from food and beverage processing facilities, and unused products from the agricultural sector, like unharvested crops. And you can see all these in the slide. Next. And of all that wasted food that we generate, 40% of it comes from us, from households. Households wasted almost 25 million tons of food in 2018. That's 153 pounds of food per person per year wasted. Next. So where does all that wasted food go when we throw it away and we toss it in the trash? In the United States in 2018, 96% of our wasted food was sent to landfills, incinerators, or in-sink disposal, and only 3% of it was composted. And as you can see in the image on the slide, food is the single largest category of waste that we send to the landfill. At 24%, it's almost a quarter of everything that we throw away. And once food is deposited in a landfill, it decomposes anaerobically or without oxygen and generates methane. Methane is a potent greenhouse gas that contributes to climate change. And landfills are the 3rd largest source of human-related methane emissions in the United States. Next. But methane isn't the only environmental and climate impact of wasted food. When we throw food away, we are wasting so much more than the food. We're wasting the energy, the water, the labor to produce, process, transport, store, prepare, and dispose of all that food that did not get eaten. And more than 85% of greenhouse gas emissions from landfill food waste actually result from activities prior to the disposal of food. So the production, the transport, all of that. And the other thing we waste is we waste money when we waste food. An average family of 4 spends an estimated $1,500 per year just on food they never eat. Next. The food recovery hierarchy prioritizes the actions that we can take to prevent and divert wasted food. And starting at the top, the most impactful strategy we can take is to prevent food from being wasted in the first place. This is known as source reduction. Then we should prioritize donating food, feeding it to animals, converting it to energy, and composting it. Today, you're going to learn fun and easy actions you can take to waste less food at home. From proper food storage to cooking techniques to home composting, we don't have to let 30 to 40% of our food go uneaten, and we can definitely prevent more of it from going to the landfill. So let's learn how. So now we're going to watch a quick video. There's my information in case you need it. And now we're going to watch a quick video before I turn things over to Andrea Collins from the Natural Resources Defense Council.
Sweet baby, I'll travel the world for you. I love you.
Can we get strawberries?
No, honey.
Please?
Okay.
Great. Thanks. And now I'm going to pass it over to Andrea Collins from the Natural Resource Defense Council. Go ahead, Andrea.
Thanks, Alana, and thank you so much to the Federal Interagency Collaboration for organizing this event. As Alana said, I'm Andrea Collins, a Sustainable Food Systems Specialist with NRDC, an international nonprofit aimed at safeguarding the earth, its people, plants and animals, and the natural systems on which all life depends. As Alana pointed out, food waste is a climate issue, and I hope you've heard of the amazing resources put together by Project Drawdown. Some years ago, they published a beautiful magazine outlining the top 80 or so solutions to climate change that are available today. And here they've included many of them. This one's onshore wind turbines, this one's large scale solar. Here you can see LED lights. This is electric cars. And this large one is reducing food waste. It's an incredibly potent solution. It's generally in the top 3 solutions for all of the various scenarios that Drawdown have analyzed. And I'll note that this is preventing food from becoming waste. Compost is also its own solution, right around here somewhere. We create a tremendous amount of climate pollution throughout the life cycle of our food, producing synthetic fertilizers, the energy that's used to run farming machinery and refrigerated trucks, throughout the life of livestock, especially cattle. And finally, when food ends up in landfill, it can't properly decompose and releases methane. When we waste food, we're also wasting all of the resources that go into producing our food. It's a tremendous amount of land, water, chemicals, and money that goes into growing, cooling, processing, transporting food. In California, where I live, and where 1/3 of our nation's fruit and vegetables are grown, the governor just announced a drought emergency, and we can't afford to waste water on food that's never eaten. Food is lost or wasted at every stage, from farm to our plates, but we waste more food in our homes than anywhere else along the food supply chain. And many of the reasons why food is wasted in restaurants and grocery stores are attributed to consumer attitudes and behaviors around food. If we want to get those businesses on board with the practices that they need to improve their operations and to prevent unnecessary waste from occurring in their businesses, we consumers need to tell them that wasting less food is important to us. We need an upswelling from the general public telling businesses that this is what we want from them, that we are ready for a more efficient food system. Preventing food waste is an age-old tradition. All across the globe, prior to refrigeration, people knew how to make the most of their food and how to make it last as long as possible, simply as a survival mechanism. But in our efforts to diminish the amount of food that goes to waste today, we're up against tremendous emotional and cultural barriers. In the research that we've done, just about everyone feels guilty about food waste. And because of that, we don't want to think about our own wasteful behaviors. We have a tremendous psychological barrier that we need to overcome in helping people understand that food waste occurs in all of our homes, in all of our cities, at all of our events, in every kitchen, and it's going to take all of us working together to solve this issue. There are many reasons why food goes to waste, and they differ from one household to another. They might include a lack of awareness about wasteful behaviors or a lack of info about how to prevent that food from becoming waste. Sometimes food is wasted because of ineffective storage that makes food spoil faster than it can get used up, or because of insufficient planning or not sticking to a plan. Sometimes we waste food because we make too much when there's a mismatch between our portions and how much we're going to be eating, or because of over-purchasing, sometimes because of how the product is packaged, but other times because of impulse buys, which then trickle down to waste in other ways. Lastly, too many of us misinterpret the expiration date myth. I wanted to put this up because there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution to reducing food waste in the US, but I'm going to talk about a number of different tools that can help address various elements of these problems. To that end, we launched Save the Food, a public education campaign to help consumers realize the importance of preventing food waste and to help people recognize some of the small ways that we can be agents of change. Beginning with that ad that you saw that we call The Life and Times of Strawberry. But I hope you've also seen the campaign out and about in the world on billboards or bus shelters. We have digital and social media, and the core is a website called savethefood.com and informational flyers like this one. So if you need to start small to prevent food waste, I have one thing you can do once and never have to think about again. Set your fridge to 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Any warmer and your food will spoil too quickly, but if it's much colder than that, you run the risk of frost, which damages your food, and you're running the fridge harder than it needs to, which means you're wasting money on your energy bill too. If you're up for a little more attention to your fridge, you can easily make your food last longer by putting it in the appropriate part of your fridge. For example, many fridges have a low humidity and a high humidity drawer, and they're built that way for a reason. I know when I had my first apartment, I had no idea what to do with the crisper drawers. So I put the humidity knobs in the middle and I hoped that I was averaging out to the right answer. But if you set them to match the food that's in the drawer, your food will be preserved better. You can put most veggies in the high humidity drawer, including greens, broccoli, carrots, and most fruit, and a couple of those veggies that are actually fruits, like peppers, will do better in a low humidity environment so that they don't grow mold. The door is the warmest part of the fridge, so don't store anything that's highly perishable there, like milk or eggs. Throw them deeper into the fridge. It's also important that there's room in your fridge for air to circulate. And if you're often losing something in the back of the fridge only to find it on shopping day and wonder how long it's been there, you might start labeling your food with a piece of masking tape or you can put it in a clear container so that you can see what it is. It's less likely to get forgotten. Or you might designate a part of your fridge as the Eat Me First section so that anyone who's looking for a snack or who's quickly bustling out the door in the morning and needs to identify what leftovers to bring for lunch can find them in an easy to identify place. SaveTheFood.com also has storage tips for many different kinds of food so that you can look up which drawer to store your apples in, for example. Also in this guide are tips for freezing just about everything. Freezing is a phenomenal way to prevent food from going bad before you can get to it, but make sure you're going back and you're eating up those frozen items regularly before you go to the store and purchase new foods. This page also has tips for how to use it up if it's already gone past its prime before you came to check out SaveTheFood.com. And this info is packaged in an Alexa skill, and there's a printable version that's hidden on the website I can direct folks to if you want to print out a copy to pin to the front of your fridge. Oops. In addition to storage tips, Save the Food has online planning tools. As the summer progresses and we're hopefully more able to gather together, the Guestimeter is designed to help party hosts overcome the fear of running out of food. It allows you to build a menu, say for a barbecue. It will add in how many people you think are coming, how many leftovers you want. Then you tell it what you're cooking, how many sides you're planning, and it will tell you how big those sides should be for the number of people you're expecting. And if you add in more sides, it will bring the portion sizes down for you. The second tool is called Meal Prep Mate. We saw the rising trend in meal prepping, which is cooking a big batch and then doling it out into meals for the whole week. But we noticed a gap in guidance about how to do meal prepping right. I had personal experience with doing it the wrong way. Sometimes my meals were too big, and instead of lasting for 3 meals, they lasted for 5, and all of a sudden I had too much food at the end of the week. Other times I made something that was just so-so, and I was really tired of it by the end of the week. So Meal Prep Mate was designed to help people think in portions and in building blocks of core ingredients. There's some pre-designed menus that you can use that look at the same ingredients multiple different ways to avoid what we called flavor fatigue. And the tool allows you to pick your own ingredients or build your own plan separately. Another feature of the site is a depository of recipes. They're mostly focused on using up odds and ends, like the greens of root vegetables, or reviving food that's past its prime, like that wrinkly apple that we talked about in the storage guide. If it's too mealy and not going to be palatable on its own, you can turn it into a cookie through this recipe. The last one I'm going to introduce here is that too many of us are throwing away food prematurely just because of the date that's printed on it. Do not trust the expiration date myth. Those dates on your food are not federally regulated, except in the case of infant formula. And that's because we want to be sure that babies are getting enough nutrition, and the nutritional quality of formula will decline with time. On adult food, usually the date is there just to indicate peak quality, and it won't tell you when food is going to make you sick. The hodgepodge of state labels has caused a lot of confusion. And 9 states don't even require any date labels whatsoever. And the requirements in other states might be contradictory to one another, or in some cases, they're unnecessarily restrictive. There's efforts underway in Congress to standardize these date labels, but it hasn't happened yet. More often, the date label is not going to tell you whether your food is still good. In most cases, if it's perishable, whether it's been stored at the right temperature is going to be a better indicator of how long it will last. And your nose and your taste buds will be able to tell you if milk has gone sour long before it will make you sick. So stop tossing food just because it's past the date. And I have just another minute, so I'm gonna hop in here with one other idea that in case you're responsible for more than just household level food waste, in addition to helping households reduce food waste, NRDC has a project working with cities to help implement policies and programs to reduce food waste at the city level that we call Food Matters. And similar to Save the Food Matters website has a number of tools and guides for making progress on these 10 strategies. It starts with a toolkit that describes them all, includes guides on many of them, and a number of case studies that highlight success in a number of the cities that we've been working on with these strategies. So if you're a local policymaker or you have a say in local policy, perhaps through a food policy council, I encourage you to check out more resources on Food Matters as well. So I'd like to just close by reiterating that food waste is a solvable issue and we can do it, but it's going to take all of us working together. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrea. For those of you who have not visited SaveTheFood.com, I just want to encourage you to go check it out. It's my go-to for anything that I need to figure out how to store flour, coffee, you name it. So thank you to Andrea. Next up, we have Chef Allison Muntford, and she is from Ends and Stems, and she's going to do a cooking demo for us. So take it away, Allison.
Thanks, Lana. I'm so excited to be here with y'all today. We're going to get in the actual kitchen. I was looking at how perfect this mirrors the strawberry video we saw. And I'm going to go back and touch on some of the amazing points that Andrea made, because it really, the next step is what we're doing in our home kitchen. So I remember when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, it was always reuse, recycle, or reduce, reuse, recycle, but we've added refuse to it. And my whole theory on wasting less food in your home kitchen is really starting with the refuse. It's the easiest step, and it's the best step because anything you don't buy also leaves money in your pocket. So when I first started in my culinary career, I had a cafe and a meal delivery company. So my introduction to refusing and reducing to waste food really just came as business sensibility. The margins are so thin in the food industry, and in order to survive with a bootstrapped Main Street sort of cafe, I couldn't waste money on food. My first year open, I actually over-purchased by almost $30,000. And then I wondered why I had no salary at the end of the year. So we quickly revived. And one of the things I found is, I think it was Alana who said at the beginning, we waste on average in our home something like 150 pounds per year. I looked that up the other day. It's about the size of a panda. So imagine if we wasted that all at one time and you're carrying 150 pounds out to the trash can, you would make changes really quickly. But what's actually happening is that every time we peel a potato, we're wasting a few ounces here and there. Every time we go to have cauliflower, we don't utilize the stems. So that's going to waste. So we're ending up with all of these bits that, we're peeling carrots. Why? Why are we peeling carrots? Let's stop peeling carrots. For the most part, the peels taste absolutely great. We're taking off mushroom stems when they're perfectly edible and actually super delicious. So this bucket starts filling up. And actually in the food industry, one of the ways to get your employees to stop was to have them fill up a bucket like this. And then at the end of the day, you dump it out and you see what was left and what was edible. Another really big one, sometimes this just comes from not knowing, and sometimes it's laziness. But how do you take the green top out of your tomato? I see so many people that just slice it like this. And all of this edible tomato, it might not look like much right now. Maybe you're growing your own tomatoes. Maybe it's tomato season, and it doesn't feel like, that's making such a huge impact. I mean, it was just Earth Day. If you're telling me to save the planet, I need to stop wasting this much of my tomato. I can see how that feels a little anticlimactic. But by the time all of us do this over and over and over again, this does really add up. And that's why reducing food waste, or cooking with ends and stems, as I name my company, is my favorite thing to talk about, because it is one of the easiest sort of toeholds you can get on doing something for the planet that really means something. One of the other things that currently really bothers me right now was this story about Coca-Cola refusing to put their product in glass bottles because they think everyone prefers the plastic. I really wish I could get them to stop, and I don't have a clue. I don't even know how to start. I think I texted a senator or something and told them to tell Coca-Cola, stop with the plastic. but it's not really going to do anything. But right here in my house, I'm in control. One of my favorite speakers actually referred to the person who decides what you buy at the grocery store as the nutritional gatekeeper. I'm the one who decides what impulse purchase happened in the grocery store. I'm the one who decides, are we going to eat the ends of the cauliflower, or am I only going to use the familiar part? So I'm really in control of this. And I like that. That makes me feel like at the end of the day, I'm doing something. On that note, though, it's really hard. I have 2 little kids that I cook a lot for parents. My service helps parents decide what to cook and make a meal plan. I completely understand whether you're working or just living through a pandemic or you have kids. It's really hard to make some of these changes. So what I always recommend doing is just start with like 1 or 2 things. So I've mentioned potatoes and carrots, right? So here's my, and I'll add chard in here too. Roasting potatoes. I see recipes that call for peeling the potatoes, but why? Look how beautiful they look with the skin on. See those with the skin on? And then my favorite side dish ever, probably of all time, is just smashed red skin potatoes. You could certainly peel them off, but it's more time, you're generating waste, and we eat with our eyes first. So they look so beautiful with the pops of red in there. So just start with 1 or 2 things. Let's say it's your peeler. So we're not going to peel our carrots anymore. You get a scrub brush, you scrub it instead. We're not going to peel our potatoes anymore. You wash them instead. And then once you get the potatoes down, maybe you move on to greens. Somebody asked me the other day what I thought the most unsung, commonly wasted food is, and my answer was chard stems. So chard is related to beets, and especially on rainbow chard and red chard, a lot of recipes will call for you to strip this, you wash the leaves, and then you throw this part away. But this part on kale, but especially on chard, is really, really flavorful. It tastes kind of like a beet. So when I cook chard, I chop that up, and you can see it there in my chard, and it's fancy. I mean, I would serve it at a catering event. Even if somebody was paying me a lot of money to come to their house and cook for them, I would absolutely serve that. So you can just dice it just like celery. It's nice and super crispy. And this is where it does, there's no magic to this. It is a little bit of a learning curve. You have to understand how to treat each vegetable. You can find that always on my website. I actually love when people DM me questions like this on Instagram. So I'm here for you. You can reach out anytime and I will tell you specifically what to do with each part of each vegetable. But once you know and say, okay, that's how I cut chard, just like celery. We saute this with a little butter, maybe some sliced garlic, and then you toss your greens in afterwards. And you didn't separate out to have waste on that part. Now you've got chard down. You know what to do with chard. So start with the things that you do that come into your house often. And then also, I'm pretty sure on the NRDC website too, there's a food waste audit. I have one on my site, how to do a food waste audit. This really helps you measure and track the most common things you're putting in your trash can. Every family is a little bit different. And then you could pinpoint those things that constantly come up and start making changes there. Whenever I've done a food waste audit, it's always lettuce. I think I love salads. When I go to restaurants, I always order a salad. But when I'm at home, turns out I don't like them. So why do I go to the grocery store, buy lettuce, think I'll eat a salad, and then I never do? So I've actually just stopped. I'll either then buy lettuce in bulk. So maybe I buy it for a specific purchase, or I buy a tiny, tiny amount because I know I won't use it. So that is the part of the refuse, and you bring home less. So the other part of that, and what my business is now, and what I'm really a self-proclaimed expert is in meal planning. So meal planning is different than meal prepping, because planning is really just the idea of having a plan, knowing what you're going to cook and which ingredients you need to bring home in order to pull them off, or to pull off those dishes. Whereas meal prep, like Andrea was talking about, is more like batch cooking. And that can be really great, but it does take a lot of time to do meal prep. And one of the most common things I hear from families when I ask them about their food waste and their cooking habits is that they actually just don't like leftovers very much at all. And meal prep is essentially just eating leftovers all the time. So if you meal plan, if that style isn't for you, meal planning is honestly just writing down an idea of what you'll have this week. So when you look, there are meal planning apps, there are lists and different things you can use, but I want you to take it back a few steps. We don't start right here with, okay, Monday, what am I gonna have? That's not where we start. We go back, we start in our kitchens, you start in your refrigerator, and you pull out things that you have. I had a few green beans left over. I had this tomato in there. I had some mushrooms. These all came from the last time I went shopping and I didn't get to them. So you jot those ideas down. Then the next thing you do is check your calendar for the upcoming week. So I know in my house, for example, my husband works late on Wednesdays. So it's just me and the kids. So I finish working, I pick up my kids, and then I've got to get dinner on the table. I don't feel like arguing with them on those nights. It's not a night where I'm going to geek out and cook something new or spend 45 minutes. That's a night where I really want something tried and true and super simple. So Wednesday, I mark that on my calendar. But Friday nights, those are a little more relaxed. I might have fun in the kitchen. Maybe I want to try a new recipe. So I'm going to pen that in for Friday night. And then you kind of go through that way, figure out, I always recommend at least one leftovers or clean the fridge or really, easy night where you're kind of doing the work once. So maybe on Tuesday, I'm going to make a batch of chili with, some roasted veggies on the side, but I know everybody loves that. So I'm going to double it up on Tuesday, plan for leftovers on Thursday, easy night Wednesday, and Friday is something fun for me because I do love to cook. Maybe you don't, you put in whatever you want on there, and then you have the whole week. Then you take this list, you jot down your grocery list from there, and very important, you write your grocery list where? I wish I could see you or do a poll. The answer is not in the parking lot. It is not on your way into the grocery store. You do your grocery list from your house. Because as big as your brains are out there, and even if you're the one who bought all the food, I promise you, you cannot remember what you have. And also, like Andrea said, the freezer is your friend. I'm going to talk more about freezing in a minute, but you can't remember what you put in the freezer. So every other week or so, as I do my meal plan, I check back in on my freezer to see what's in there. And that's how I do part of my meal plan. So then we can also plan things like, let's say I have some extra carrots. So I'm going to chop these guys up for you. We can plan to get our refrigerator stocked with building blocks of delicious meals. So I have some extra carrots I noticed weren't going well. I put them in here. Let's pretend this water was warm. This is sort of a weird jar. And I have these green beans. They can go in here. And I have some cauliflower. That can go in here. Let's say my friend actually texted me, real true story, the other day and said, what do I do with aging cauliflower? So we're gonna make pickles in here. I have a pickle recipe on my site. You can Google a pickle recipe, but it's basically vinegar. You actually would warm this up, but then you can actually do it cold too, but it's a little better if you warm it up first. So we have pickles, the making of the pickles, rather, the vegetables that will become pickles. Vinegar, I'm gonna do equal parts salt and sugar. And usually it's about a teaspoon to 1 cup of liquid. You put that in there. And then you can season this up. I have bay leaves, a little fennel seed is really nice. Get some of those in there. And then I like a little garlic or whatnot. It depends on what kind of vegetables you're going for. Put that in there. We would stir this up. And these are called refrigerator pickles. You can see how nice these look. Let's see, can you see that? So you want to keep these in the refrigerator and they're good for months that way. And if you have very clean people in your house who can promise to always pull them out with a clean utensil, you can actually add more vegetables back to this pickling liquid because it has so many preservatives in it and the salt and the sugar, and it stays in the refrigerator. You can use this liquid over again. You can even buy a jar of pickles from the store and use their liquid. But what I have seen from actually being in people's houses is that somebody sticks their fingers in there and then introduces bacteria to it. Don't do that for many reasons, but definitely don't use the liquid if they do that. So pickling, you can actually pickle strawberries. If you do a little more sugar into it, you can do a lightly pickled strawberry. You only want to let the strawberries go for maybe, I don't know, an hour or so, and they taste sort of weird, but amazing on ice cream. You can pickle almost anything. One of the restaurants that was by me in San Francisco used to do pickled French fries. So they would take their potatoes, slice, into French fry shape, put this in a light pickling liquid for a couple of hours, dry them off, and then roast them, sort of like I did my roasted potatoes here. You have a lightly pickled potato. That's just cool. It doesn't really preserve potatoes anymore. But the other veggies, you buy yourself a couple weeks when they're starting to go bad. Let's see, the other thing, where's my dish here? So as we're going through and chopping, let's say these mushroom stems looked really dry and I didn't use them, we could put them in there. As you're doing your chard, let's say this piece kind of wasn't looking good, you could put that in there. This is my stock bin. So I always make stock. One of the biggest differences between restaurant chefs and home cooks is that in the restaurant, they're always using stock. You basically can use it anywhere you would use water. A lot of pan sauces, like if you're searing a steak or a chicken breast or even a piece of fish, you want to add a little ladle full of stock. A lot of pasta sauces can be thickened with stock. A lot of teriyaki and like Chinese style pan sauces, the reason they taste so much better in the restaurants is actually they're using a little bit of stock in there too. So you fill up this bin just as you go, as you're cooking throughout the week, or maybe even 2 weeks. You keep this in the freezer and just take it out to keep filling it up. You don't want to be making stock every moment, but when you have a Sunday afternoon, you want your house to smell amazing, get some vegetable or some chicken stock on the stove and you have this ready to go. Okay. So specifically on some vegetables here, I'm going to bop back to that. On cauliflower, one of my favorite pieces is actually this. This tastes amazing. Same on broccoli. You can see I've roasted this here so you can see how it looks. Let's get it. Ooh, zoom in on that. The stalks and stems of cauliflower taste absolutely delicious. So this cauliflower was a really beautiful one. You can see it's super fresh. There's nothing kind of gnarly going on. I would chop and roast this entire thing. I do like it roasted better than boiled. So I would chop and roast this up just like that. And you get these big, delicious chunks. Roast that just like you would roast potatoes. So when you're thinking about your meal plan, you're like level up step. So I want you to start with a meal plan, start with a grocery list, and do the planning, like I said, by calculating in your life, what's coming up this week. Also your emotions, what are you craving? What are you in the mood for? But then also your pantry. Then level up, you've mastered that, you're ready for the next level. Let's say one night you're going to have chicken breast with roasted cauliflower, and a potato or whatnot. Now you start thinking through these vegetables that you've mastered and you go, you know what, a whole thing of cauliflower is going to give me these roots, which I could roast, but these also work great in soup. So now on day 1, we're going to have chicken with cauliflower florets. And then on day 2, we're going to make a soup with the cauliflower stems, and maybe we'll use our mushrooms from here. So we know we can use the whole mushrooms up to do that. And then maybe, let's say for some reason you had a carrot that you felt like you had to peel, this can also go into soup as well, because wash it first for sure. But then you're kind of thinking through buying one thing and how is it getting cycled into another thing. And if you don't have time to, let's say you don't have time to get to the soup this week, you can also freeze this and then make it into soup later. So as you start leveling up, you start making these connections. And then that's how you'll be able to meal plan sort of, in this beautiful circle where you know how everything works. But especially if you're a beginning cook and this is all extremely overwhelming, start with one thing. Start with the potato peels, start with the cauliflower, master one vegetable, chicken stock, or whatever it is, and then add on to it from there. Because even though we do have so much opportunity to reduce food waste in everybody's home, if you're not currently doing much at all, any step forward is going to be an improvement, and you can always build on it from there. So start with one thing, find a way to use those ends and stems, and message me or find me on Instagram if you have further questions for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Allison. That was fantastic. I think the point that you made about starting small and starting to take one thing at a time is great. I know that I started making my own stock and it's made such a difference in cooking, and I just keep a bag in the freezer and put scraps in as I go. So thank you for that. Next up, we have Brenda Platt. She is from the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, and I'm so excited because she's going to talk about both hot composting and one of my favorites, vermicomposting, or composting with worms. So take it away, Brenda.
Thanks, Alana and Allison. That was amazing. I'm coming over to eat dinner at your house tonight. So thanks everyone for having me, and for all of you for being here. So when you have some of the stuff that's left over after you've taken all the tips that Allison and Andrea shared with you, you've reduced your waste and you're using your stems and ends, but you still have something left over that you can't eat. This is where home composting comes in. So what I'm going to do in the few minutes I have, I'm going to give you an introduction to hot composting that you can do in your backyard, and also vermicomposting, which is something you can do with worms. And if you don't have a yard, you're in an apartment, or you have no space, that could be a great option for you. So first, let's just talk about what is compost. So compost is a living soil amendment. It's not soil, it's a soil enhancer, but it's full of these amazing beneficial microbes, and it's rich in something that we call organic matter. I like to call it black gold, and that's my home compost shown right there that I've made. Now, there's many reasons to compost. Of course, less waste, but really compost is all about the soil. Compost improves soil tilth. It improves fertility of the soil. It suppresses plant disease, and it improves something that we call cation exchange capacity, which is the ability of soil to retain nutrients. And one of its most amazing properties of compost is that it holds soil particles together, and it increases the water holding capacity of soil. So if we have drought conditions this summer, which many parts of the country are already experiencing, it could be the difference between having a tomato plant live or not live. And one of the other benefits is it enhances soil structure. Now, we talked about climate. Healthy soils protect the climate. They act as a carbon sink. They store carbon in the soil. And soils need organic matter to do that. So compost basically equals organic matter. It's nature's way of capturing carbon. So here's the compost pile food web. There's diverse organisms that thrive in the compost pile. They're both micro and macro, and composting happens through their efforts. These are your volunteers, and your job in composting is to make them happy. So the bacteria, the fungi, other microbes are going to feed on organic residues like leaves, your kitchen scraps, your yard trimmings. These are your first level decomposers that are thriving in the compost pile. And as these microorganisms consume materials, your pile is going to heat up. Now, as it cools, and I'll talk more about that later, it becomes inhabited by common soil microorganisms, protozoa, worms, mites, insects, and then other larger organisms feed on them. They also feed on the organic matter, and those are the second and third degree decomposers. The compost process is literally teeming with life, as is the finished compost. So today, there's many ways to do composting. I mean, you may be lucky if you live in an area where your county or city, where there's private entrepreneurs can collect the food scraps, or you can be part of a community gardening program. But today we're talking about action that you can take at home. So I'm going to be talking about home composting and some of the basics of what you need to know. So there's so many ways to do it. These are kind of 6 of kind of the key strategies. So the wire bins and the repurposed wooden pallets that are shown in the top 2 images on the left, those are very low budget options. If you're just composting yard trimmings, they're going to work fine. But if you're going to be doing food scraps, and especially if you're in an urban area with what I call rat pressure, meaning that there are rodents in your neighborhood, which a lot of our urban cities have problems with, mostly because I'll say we have open dumpsters and open trash cans. That's why we have rat problems in our communities. But if you're in an area like that, you might choose an enclosed system. You can build your own. This 3-bin system shown here is enclosed. They work really well. There's many open source designs available. The stationary bin, which is that black one shown in the top right, there's many versions available to purchase. Most of them are made from recycled plastic, and they're designed so you can harvest compost from the bottom, add to the top. The tumblers are a great option. Also, if you're in an urban area or you don't have a lot of space, one thing I just want to warn you of is that beware of smaller systems that are too small, because they're harder to get the pile hot. Now, some come with dual chambers, which is shown in the bottom right. They're designed to let one compartment finish while you start another one. But you might be asking, well, how do I know what system to choose? And that in part is going to depend on what materials you want to compost and how much you generate. So another option, as I mentioned, is worm composting or vermicomposting. It's a completely different process, but if you don't have a yard or want to do it indoors, it's worth considering. This is kind of some of the differences in worm composting with hot composting. First of all, I'll just say, with worms, the material is being ingested by an animal, it's going through the animal and it comes out the other end. But it's a faster process. Within a month, you can have vermicompost. With hot composting, you can take more materials. It's a little bit more forgiving process. It's not animal husbandry, if you will, but you really, compost needs to cure, and you'll have good compost in 6 months, even a year, in 12 months. But it's, they operate, they're a little different. Worm composting tends to be smaller volumes depending on how many worms you have. And in that case, surface area is important, whereas in hot composting, volume is really important. So now I'm going to just kind of run through some basic steps for hot composting. And what's really important to know is that no matter what system you use, you need to know about the ingredients for good compost. And that's air, water, and food. Again, we're trying to make those microbes happy, and the microbes need carbon for energy and growth, and they need nitrogen for protein and reproduction. So what we call, you may have heard these terms like browns, you got to mix browns with green materials. So browns are materials that are relatively high in carbon. That's going to be like fall leaves, wood chips, sawdust, straw, twigs, cut plant stems from your garden, those kind of things. Greens are materials that are relatively high in nitrogen, definitely your food scraps. Coffee grounds are obviously brown, but they're high in nitrogen. Tea bags are fine, coffee filters are fine, grass clippings are high in nitrogen. In general, biological organisms, including people, need 25 to 35 times more carbon than nitrogen, which is why giving the microbes the carbon and nitrogen in the right proportions is kind of important. So it's like cooking. It is a recipe, and depending on what materials you have readily available, you might need to adjust. But in general, a guideline that we like to share is you need, for every pail or wheelbarrow of your greens, your food scraps, let's say, you're going to need twice as much by volume of browns or carbon-rich materials. And often if you're running into piles that are smelly, it's probably because you have too much nitrogen in your pile. All right, so a lot of people ask for home composting, what can you put in your pile and what should you leave out? Well, definitely fruit and vegetable scraps that you cannot eat or cook with. There are things that you don't want to eat, like banana peels or perhaps citrus rinds or the pith. So all of that is just great. Eggshells, crushed first, garden trimmings. The things you want to leave out, particularly if you're new to this, is do not put any meat. Do not put any fish, bones, dairy products besides those eggshells. Try to train your family to remove those produce stickers. If you don't want weeds growing in your pile, don't put the weeds with the seeds. We recommend no diseased or infected plants, no cooked food, no chemicals or herbicides. Leave those things out. Really, the rule of thumb is when in doubt, leave it out. Okay, so water and oxygen. One thing I cannot emphasize enough is that composting is an aerobic process. It needs oxygen. And when it's in a starved oxygen environment is when you may run into odor problems or other issues. And microbes also need water. And you would be surprised how much water you need in a compost pile. It's really, when you're starting out, 50 to 60% by weight. So we teach an easy strategy for how you know about 50 to 60% moisture by weight. And that is, you grab a handful of your mix, you give it a squeeze. If it doesn't hold together, it just falls apart, it's clearly too dry. If it's dripping wet, or you hold your hand up and it drips into your armpit, that we call that the armpit test sometimes, then it's clearly too wet. You want just a few drops to come between your knuckles for it to be right. And the secret to composting is oxygen. So if you have a tumbler, you can tumble it. But if you have an open system, your pitchfork is going to be your best friend. So get a pitchfork if you don't have one. Some basic supplies for home composting is, think about how you're going to collect your kitchen scraps in your kitchen. You're going to need some kind of pail. When your compost is done, how are you going to empty it from your bin? You need a bucket or a wheelbarrow. You don't need a temperature probe, but it can help you gauge what's going on in the process. You're going to need access to water. A face mask can be useful if you're screening compost or mixing. Sometimes those particles can become airborne bioaerosols. You don't want to breathe it. If you're having a lot of avocado pits or mango pits, wood chips, a screener can be helpful, but if you're not adding materials that don't need to be screened out, you don't need those. So preparing materials. Those microbes, they live in a water film around each particle, and that's so surface area is important. So you want to, if you have a corn cob, you want to chop that corn cob, into a few pieces. That's going to help with the surface area. Even if you've got a citrus cut in half, you just cut it in a few more pieces, more surface area. And I'm glad that in my compost bucket there, Allison, you can see that I do cut out my tomato tops and try not to waste anything, right? Remove those produce stickers. If you have staples in your tea bags, remove those too. They will fall into your compost. So this is what our typical in my family of four, our pail looks like: cilantro stems, eggshells, garlic peels, avocado pit skins. This was probably Taco Tuesday. You can see citrus and onion and avocado and cilantro. Banana peels, you do not need to chop those. They will break down very quickly. Strawberry stems, pistachios. We, I think, generate a 1/4 pound of coffee every morning. And so you don't want to send that to the landfill. There's a tea bag without a staple. So also you can adjust your purchasing if you want. But when you have your kitchen pail, the next step you want to do, you're going out to your system in your backyard. So whatever system you're using, you want to have your browns right there ready to mix in. You can't store your food scraps. You can freeze them, by the way, that's fine, but you need to have your browns ready to mix with it. If you run out of browns, you have to stop hot composting. I get a lot of questions about how to avoid rodents. So here's some tips. The number one is do not add meat, dairy, fats, oils, or cooked food to your system. And you want to incorporate all bits of food really well into your pile. Never leave any food exposed. So cover it all. Another tip that people often, they kind of ignore or don't think about is they put their compost bin, against a fence or in a corner. You don't want to do that. You actually want to have it in an open area because rodents are nervous about open space and predators. So you want to avoid clutter. You want to trim, make it clear sight lines. If you're having one of those stationary bins, having some 1/4 inch metal mesh called hardware cloth underneath it can help prevent rodents. But rodents, they like habitats that are undisturbed. So activity is good. If you're actively composting, you probably won't run into any problems. So I'm going to just talk about how do you know your compost is finished, and then how to use it, and then I'll cover a few minutes on worm composting. So when your pile is no longer heating up, you can allow it to cure for a few weeks. 4 weeks is minimum. As I said before, 6 months or even a year is longer, but it's going to be crumbly, it's going to be loose, it's going to be 1/3 of its original volume. You shouldn't see any recognizable food scraps. I mean, you might have a mango pit or something like that in there, but you shouldn't really, see anything. This is me with my homemade, really simple screener, which is duct tape around hardware cloth, screening directly into a bucket. I've got a bandana around because I'm short and I don't want to be breathing anything. These are some of the overs, as we say, that get screened out. You can throw that right into your pile. Look at that black gold, right? Mango pit, you can see there were worms that were living in that mango pit, threw that right back into my pile. I'm lucky that my husband built me this screener that fits on a wheelbarrow. And so if you have a lot of compost, you can really fill up, it could be faster to screen. There's my black gold going into a new bed I was creating just last weekend. In terms of incorporating compost, there's different ways to use it. You can put 2 to 4 inches a layer of compost in the top 6 to 8 inches of your soil prior to planting. Use it as mulch. You can create a potting mix. Maybe you'll get jalapenos as big as those. So if you think, okay, that's too much effort, I'm not going to turn my pile, I'm not going to water, that's okay. If you're more of a dump and run, just know you can do a low effort. It's a very flexible system, but it's going to be slower. You may not have high temperatures, and you may have weed seeds persist. So let me just spend 5 minutes I have remaining just to kind of run through and introduce worm composting, because it's so very different. But you get this black gold, which has even better properties for suppressing plant disease than even regular compost. And I'll just point you to Rhonda Sherman, who's a international worm expert at North Carolina State Extension, has an amazing website on vermicomposting for households, institutions, schools. There's the link, we'll send it to you, but there's a lot of misinformation, as you can gather, on the internet about all kinds of things, but composting and worm composting is included. So go to a reputable site. One thing I want to emphasize is that you have to use the correct species of worm for composting. There's something like 9,000 species of earthworms, but only 7 that do vermicomposting. And science has divided those categories of worms into basically 3 scientific categories. And the epigeic is the ones that we want to use because they don't burrow. They live under like cow patties and pastures and leaf litter and in compost, and they're going to eat your food scraps. And you need to get them from a reputable worm dealer. You have to know what you're getting. Eisenia fetida is the #1 type of earthworm that's used for food scraps, and about 1 pound has 1,000, but they rise to the surface to eat. So that's the main thing. To know it's a surface thing. It's not a volume thing. And worms only eat 25 to 35% of their body weight daily. So if you have 2 pounds of worms, they can only eat half a pound of fruit and vegetable scraps. So something to keep in mind. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna add your fruit and vegetables in thin layers of 1 to 2 inches. And the worms rise up in the system to eat the food scraps in the top 3 to 6 inches. And so a lot of the systems, which I'll show you, you can make your own out of like Rubbermaid containers, but you can buy them ready-made. They're trays and they're surface area, and they're really easy to use because when one bin is full and full of worm compost, the worms have eaten it, you can just switch that out and put the food scraps, a new bin on top with your fresh food scraps, and the worms will come through these holes and move. They have very sensitive skin, and you don't need to really touch them. They're great communicators, and they'll find the food that they like. So you can build your own. I've seen many different benches. I love this one that had a repurposed bathtub too. So there's no one way to do vermicomposting. They do need bedding, and that's where they get their carbon, by the way. So you can use leaves, coconut coir, cardboard, newspaper. Worms do like moisture. They breathe through their skin. So they need to be kept moist more than hot composting. So that's really important. And the other thing worms don't like, I call them my princesses. They don't like hot peppers. They don't like onions and garlic. Citrus is a little too acidic. You don't want to put sugary foods in there because you don't want to attract ants, or very salty. If you do put a lot of fruit pits, nothing's going to happen to them. Mango pits are fine. I have found they love mango pits, but you don't want meat, dairy products, kind of a lot of the same things I went through with hot composting. The other thing is worms don't have teeth, so it does help to chop things smaller than you would need to for your backyard bin. And then for harvesting compost, there's different techniques. The vertical separation I explained. There's some finished compost. There's sideways separations where you can make new bedding on one side and put food on one side, and the worms will just find the food, and then you can harvest. This is light separation where you make these little pyramids. This is me. Worms don't like light, so then you can pick off the tops, and at the end you have worms in one pile and all finished compost in another. And using compost, it's very similar. You can use it in gardens, lawns, around trees and nurseries for house plants. It's just really great stuff. And this is my last slide on helpful tips is for hot composting, check moisture, turn, fluff, add air, have your browns. Don't use bins that are too small. It's going to take a while to cure. And for vermicomposting, you don't want to turn your bin. You feed small pieces. You don't want to overfeed, because if you keep layering food scraps on top, the worms rise to the surface and you'll have the rotting food left. So you always want the last feeding to be consumed before you add more. And that's what we have, and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Brenda. You packed it a lot of information and it was really wonderful. And I just want to add to what Brenda said, that it may seem foreign at first, or there's a lot of different details, but once you get started, it's a really fun process. And when you see how little food you're putting in your trash can and it's all going in your compost pile, once you've prevented it, cooking in the kitchen, it's a really rewarding process. So thank you, Brenda. Okay, with that, we're going to move on to our final presenter, Jonathan Deutsch from Drexel, and I am going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to try to keep this very brief because there are a ton of great questions, and I have the privilege of moderating the Q&A with all of our presenters, so we're going to get to that. But wanted to talk a little bit about our work at Drexel and our work with the students, and let you know about a big, exciting announcement that happened yesterday on Earth Day, if you haven't seen it. So we're going to talk about upcycling. First, my background as a professor, I'm a professor of food and hospitality management, more on the culinary side. And I work as something called a research chef. I'm a certified research chef from the Research Chefs Association. And research chefs work at the intersection of culinary arts and food science. So we know how to make delicious food, but we also know how to do it at an industrial level and work in food processing. And so I think this is a good complement to a lot of the things you can do at home, because you don't make all of your food at home. You also go to the grocery store, you also go to restaurants, and being a conscientious consumer is also part of what we're talking about when we're talking about food waste. So we engage our students in real world problem solving in the food system. And we're really developing two products. One product is our students and graduates who are studying culinary arts, food science, nutrition, product design, culinary science, hospitality management, and also developing food products that better the food system. They're sustainable, health promoting, or accessible food products. And one of our big categories is upcycling, which we'll focus on today. So a few years ago, upcycling in food wasn't even called upcycling. It was called rescued and salvaged, and all sorts of words were used. And one of the first things we did was a study to ask people what they would even call this. And in doing that, we defined what upcycled foods might be. And upcycled foods, very simply, are value-added food products that are made from foods that would otherwise be wasted. And wasted in terms of animal feed, could be compost, or worse and most egregiously could go to landfill. And still quite a bit of food from processing facilities goes to landfill. So those foods could be composted, could go to animal feed, and that's not by any means the worst outcome for them, but they could also make new food products, and that's what we focused on. So one of our first prototypes was in collaboration with Phil Abundance, which is our food bank here in Philadelphia. And we called it Rescued Relish. It was before the term upcycling was in common use for food products. And the fact that it was a relish was very significant, because one of the features of this product is it's a mixed vegetable relish. So it has turnips, it has cauliflower, it has peppers, it has all sorts of ingredients, and it's what we're calling food system sensitive. So if there's more cauliflower this week and more turnips next week, you still recognize it as the same product, but its composition may change. That has evolved to other manufacturers, and our students and staff did some work with folks to get some new products on the market. Here's a really interesting example that I think dings a lot of bells. It's called Matriarch Foods Upcycled Vegetable Broth. It's primarily a food service product, although it is available for retail. And what they're doing is they're buying the ends and stems, the scraps from fresh cut produce companies. So the companies that make those adorable little baby carrots, those football shaped carrots, we know that they're not actually baby carrots, right? They're carrots that go through a process, a mill, to get to that shape. Things like diced onions and celery sticks and a lot of those foods that you see at the front of the store are made in these huge processing facilities. And this company is actually buying those scraps and making a low sodium vegetable broth for schools and hospitals and now for retail. Two of our students also caught the upcycling bug. One of the things we've been really working with our students on is having them think through what are the potentialities of the food they're working with. So actually, one of our alums, Lindsay Kerr, who works with us, is here, did her senior project on a home pickling kit, and can share the link in the chat. Here's another student startup project that's on the market. It's an avocado seed brew, tea basically, tea-type beverage made from avocado seeds. And Zuri and Sheetal, who run this company, had this idea in making guacamole and just seeing the potential. What a shame, all these seeds. And to Brenda's point, our compost at the culinary school doesn't accept a lot of avocado seeds because they really don't break down. So this actually has a double benefit. It's an antioxidant rich beverage made from those avocado seeds, but then those avocado seeds, once cooked, do break down a little bit more easily in the compost. So I'm going to switch a few of these slides, but I wanted to point out some of our research. Most people have not heard that much about upcycled foods and have not tried it. So on the one hand, that's sort of a depressing statistic. On the other, it means that there's a lot of potential and future growth in this field that we're really excited about. Some other research we've done is around consumers' willingness to pay. A lot of people think that without knowing much about upcycled food, it should have some sort of discount because it uses ingredients that would otherwise go to waste. But what we see when we educate consumers and tell them about food waste and talk about the benefits of upcycling, they will actually pay more for upcycled products. They put a premium on it in terms of willingness to pay. Whether it costs more is obviously up to the marketer in the store. So there is a newly formed, about 1-year-old group of food brands called the Upcycled Food Association. It started with just 10 founding members and is now up over, I believe, 165. And one of the really exciting announcements yesterday was that there is now an upcycled food logo that can appear on certified upcycled food packages. So you'll start to see this in stores, I would say, over the next 6 months plus, because that process of certifying has just started. But I anticipate over the next year, you will see upcycled food products in the stores. It started with small brands, but has a wide range of brands from startups through multinationals now who are who are doing upcycling. So I am going to stop there. And we are going to address some of your many great questions.
And Jonathan, if you want, so I can give you a break for a second to catch your breath.
Sure.
Andrea, the first question, and then give you some time to catch your breath. So Andrea, one of the questions that came in was, how and what are some of the best ways to store cheese?
Sure. So you can look it up on savethefood.com for the storage section. But generally, cheese is one of those things that is susceptible to mold. So you want to take it out of its plastic packaging and really get it into some place where it can breathe a bit more. So that would be wax paper or a parchment paper packaging so that it is less likely to mold.
Great. And now, Jonathan, I can turn it over to you. And
sounds good. So many questions came in. We'll do our best to kind of move quickly through them. And people can also chat as well. One question for Allison I wanted to ask is about ends and stems. What about pesticides? So doesn't peeling vegetables help reduce exposure to pesticides? And the person who asked said, you know, that they can't always afford to buy organic or have homegrown produce.
Yeah, I love this question. Thank you for bringing that up. It can be true that the pesticides do compile, I guess, on the peels and things. But what I would recommend, if that's not in your budget and you buy whatever you need to buy to make your life go round, just find the places that it makes sense for you to dig in. I don't want you in any way to buy a non-organic potato, peel it, and then feel bad tonight when you go to bed. Instead, maybe when you buy broccoli, which is commonly on one of the Clean 15 lists, make sure to eat your broccoli stems instead. And if this house over here is throwing away potato peels and this house is throwing away something else, you just find where it makes sense for you, because we will never eat every single edible part, but do the part that makes sense for you and continue to grow from there. There are plenty of ways to get involved that fit everybody's budget.
That's great. Thanks, Allison. Brenda, question for you. How do we educate neighbors who may not be as enthusiastic about composting as we are? I have a neighbor in particular who's, you know, not thrilled with the idea, and despite following your advice about keeping vermin away, there's a perception that it's sort of an attractive nuisance. What would you tell folks like that?
Well, first of all, people tend to smell with their eyes. So keep your compost system neat and tidy. And I love and produce good, follow these best practices I shared. So if you're producing a high quality compost, you're not going to have odors, you're not going to attract rodents, you're going to have a good quality compost product, give it to your neighbors. I share buckets with various neighbors, and I love seeing, and they compliment me all the time for their flowers and their daffodils and everything. So just spread your black gold around and you'll win them over.
That's great. A question for Alana is, we had the point was made earlier about methane being released from landfills. How does that actually happen?
Sure. So if you picture a landfill and you have layer after layer after layer, normally when food decomposes, it's an aerobic process. It has oxygen and that helps it break down. But in a landfill, when you have multiple layers of waste, it's an anaerobic process, which means oxygen is not there, it's absent. And what happens is methane producing bacteria then start to evolve and start to work on the food, and methane is released. So it's the process. A lot of people will ask, I'll get this question, will this food always produce methane when it breaks down? And the answer is no. If it were in a compost pile, it would have oxygen, and so it would not be producing large amounts of methane like it does in a landfill.
Great. Another question came in for Andrea. How do you see food waste intersecting or overlapping with social justice and environmental justice issues?
Yeah, I'm glad someone asked this. There are multiple ways where food waste overlaps with social justice issues, but I can name a couple of them. We've done research into household food waste, and we found no connection between income level and the amount of food that is wasted. We thought that maybe lower income folks would have less food waste, but that wasn't what we found. Instead, really, it's the reasons why food is wasted differs for lower income houses than it does for higher income homes. Maybe if you're a minimum wage earner, you're working multiple jobs, you don't have time to go to the stores often, and your food might be spoiling between trips. Or if you're shopping at a discount store, the food quality may mean that it doesn't last as long. And lower income folks might be spending a larger portion of their household budget on food, which makes food lost much more of a financial burden for those folks. So really, this is an issue that needs to be addressed from multiple angles, and really appreciating that the reasons why food goes to waste are really personal issues. There's also a lot of environmental justice connections to food, and especially waste. We often talk about food going to landfill, but in many communities, waste is incinerated, and those incinerators are most often in low-income Black and Brown communities where they're spewing unbelievable quantities of toxic chemicals that exacerbate asthma and have negative health outcomes. So it's really important for us to reduce the waste that's going into those incinerators. And moving up the food waste hierarchy that Alana talked about at the beginning can really help us promote more jobs, promote more equitable uses for food, where food should really be going to feed people and to create jobs around processing food and really creating it as a benefit for the environment and for our communities to grow better food for us in our own homes and communities. So there's a lot of opportunities that food can become a justice issue rather than an environmental problem.
Thanks. Susan asked this question for me, and it follows on the environmental justice, social justice issue. So I'm gonna take this one, which is, she said, love the idea of rescued relish, but what are the prospects for this around the packaging? So many food banks and pantries won't take anything in glass jars. Great point. And I didn't have time to tell much of that story, so I'll tell it now. One of the goals of that project was to make something that was an upscale product for high-end retail. Because one of the challenges in upcycling was when it started, people rightly criticized it as, well, we don't want a system where we're just taking food that really would have gone to the trash or would have been wasted and feeding it to people who are experiencing food insecurity or hunger, right? We all need to work together to reduce food waste, and good food is good food, right? Whether you have the means to afford to waste or you don't have the means to afford to waste, we should all be reducing our waste. So one of the models for that project, and now it's turned into a brand that Phil Abundance is running called Abundantly Good, is it sells upcycled food in high-end, sort of specialty retailers where that jar of relish might cost $8 or $10, but the extra revenue from that jar is used to subsidize, larger scale food service product where it might cost $1. And so it's sort of a sliding scale or a Robin Hood principle. And I thought that was a great question to illustrate that. One for Allison. What do you find when you talk to folks? What are the most wasted foods that people are struggling with at home?
Love this. This is probably the #1 question I get anytime I do a food demo or talk to people. It's always leafy greens and herbs. And I know when you look at the reports and studies like the NRDC have done, I have not done those. I just talk to thousands of individuals, and they always say leafy greens and herbs. So as I was saying about lettuce, that I related to that too. I always wasted a lot of lettuce. So I look for things that are not in packaging. I don't want to buy 3 heads of romaine when I can buy them individually, or go to the farmer's market and just buy 1 head of lettuce, or even just a bulk bin of salad mix. Just buy a handful or whatever you think you can actually get through. And then on herbs, I love fresh herbs. It's certainly one of my crutches in cooking to make something look beautiful and taste amazing. So if you get a big giant bunch that you can't handle, you can use what you can manage to get done fresh, wrap it in the moist paper towel on the stems, put it in your high crisper drawer so that it doesn't spoil, or things like basil. You can try this with other herbs too, but you store it actually like flowers and then it'll last a little bit longer. But when you know it's getting to the end and it's going to go over, you need to do something to process it so you can still use it later. So I have a couple super easy like back pocket recipes, either some sort of pesto, which it doesn't just have to be basil, it could be any type of greens, or a chimichurri type of sauce. And then you get an ice cube tray or just a small container, and you can store it in small batches in your freezer. And then in 2 weeks, when you need a 10-minute dinner, you boil some spaghetti, you throw some pre-made frozen pesto cubes, and you're done in 10 minutes. So it's a little bit of time in that moment. But again, right, a Robin Hood principle, it's more time in this moment, but next week when you go to eat this, you're ready to go. So the trick is to freeze it in small bunches, so then you don't waste it.
Great. A question for Brenda about plastics. Are plastic compost containers problematic in terms of harmful chemicals leaching into the compost?
Listen, I don't know about that particular question, but what I can tell you is a lot of our trash cans, trash bags every week are full of single-use disposable plastics and packaging. That's durable plastics are probably a problem too, but it's the single use that we really need to focus attention on. And so that most of these bins are made out of recycled plastic. You're probably not going to have issues of the plastics leaching. You don't need to put your bin in the sun. You know, plastics heat up, can break down. So the heat from the compost pile doesn't come from the sun. It comes from the microorganisms eating the food and giving off energy in the form of heat. So just keep that in mind. You can put in the shade, which will help prevent it from breaking down.
Great, thanks, Brenda. Andrea, one question came in. A misconception about the reason more food isn't donated is around liability for food donations from supermarkets, hotels, restaurants, places like that. And this goes back to social justice as well. Can you talk about the laws and liabilities around donating surplus food, both for businesses, but also for individuals?
Sure. There have been federal liability protections protecting food donors since the mid-90s in the form of the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act. There's also additional liability protections for food donors in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. So there should be no fears around being sued for donating food. The federal protections cover you so long as you believe it's safe to eat, you've taken all of the appropriate food safety practices to keep it safe, and that you're donating to a nonprofit that distributes food to folks in need. So all food businesses should be donating their surplus food to feed other people who are in need. In terms of your own food in your kitchen, if you're an individual, if you have extra food that you made, it's great to share with a neighbor or a friend. That's a fantastic way of using a food that you're not going to be able to use. However, if you're interested in really tackling anti-hunger in your community, food banks and pantries will be able to use your money much more efficiently than they will excess food. So giving them a donation is going to help them pay farmers for surplus produce, or to be able to purchase the proteins that they're really struggling to get, or to hire a warehouse worker who can then move food, or a driver to get food where it needs to go. So that's my tips on food donation.
That's great, and I see some great responses in the chat too around that. Yeah, it's something that I've heard constantly. Oh well, I can't donate food because of liability, and it's a popular myth. Speaking of myths, and another one that comes up a lot, Allison, is around best by, use by, sell by dates. What are the laws around that? Is it really dangerous or toxic to eat something that has passed its expiry?
Like Andrea said at the beginning, a lot of those states are all different. There's a lot of confusion around those. what I try to help people do in teaching them, not only to meal plan and shop better, but also is to kind of get back to making culinary arts at home cool. Let's cook again. You know, it can be simple and we'll bring back our senses of when things are good to eat and when they aren't. And some of those dates might mean for highest nutrients, which if you're not an infant, if you're getting only 80% of the nutrients of broccoli, you're going to be fine. It's okay. You can still eat that broccoli. So we want to look, you know, one of the easiest places to start is always just Google. But basically, you want to look for anything bubbly, fuzzy, dented, moving, discolored. Look for anything major like that. And then you probably don't want to eat it. There's also this really interesting, like, psychological moment where somebody, picture this, somebody comes to you with a container of milk and shoves it under your nose and says, "Does this smell bad?" The answer is always yes. It's probably not true, but as soon as somebody brings it up in that way, you're skewed. So pour it into a different container so you aren't smelling like what's left on the edge or like old cardboard, and then smell it over there. Give it a little lick. It's not how you don't gain E. coli or salmonella from milk sitting too long in your fridge. That comes from other sources. So you can do a little bit of a taste and just start building your sensibilities and get back to the roots with your 5 senses of whether something's good to eat or not.
Great. Thanks, Allison. Another question came from me, which I'm happy to answer, about food processors that can make things like rice, veggies, or pre-shredded cabbage are good for using the stalks. Absolutely. So if you're someone with knife skills like Allison, and you can get through, you know, excess product quickly, I like to do things by hand, but absolutely using things like even as low tech as a box grater can work. But food processors are a great ally for using scraps, both for cooking and also for, you know, for other purposes like composting. Brenda, there is a question about a little bit more in depth on the browns. So you said no tissues. The question was why? Paper towels, why not? You know, a little bit more elaboration was requested there.
Yeah, so you know, I when I updated the acceptable materials list, it was in the middle of the pandemic, and a lot of people were using kitchen towels, for, you know, paper towels for their, you know, chemicals and tissues. And so it was just like, you know, if you're not going to be monitoring your temperatures to make sure you're reducing the risk of pathogens, then just when in doubt, leave it out. And so, especially if you're just starting out, set yourself up for success. Put the things you know will work. And I will just say with paper towels, you know, nobody's perfect. We still buy paper towels, but we don't use them every day to clean up or dry your hands. Like, we have a drawer with just old rags, and you would be amazed. Talk about saving money through food waste. There's a million ways you can save money by reducing waste, and paper towels and paper napkins is just one of those. Get some cloth napkins, some rags, have a rag drawer. You will love it and you will save money.
That's great. I think we're almost out of time. I think we'll give Allison the last word on a question that seems like a fitting one to end on, which is, how long do leftovers last and what's the best way to eat them?
People hate leftovers. I hear this so much. You're in 2 groups, right? So the health department would say 7 days. When you have a restaurant, you can cook food and serve it for up to 7 days. So without a doubt, within 7 days, you're good to go. After that, it starts to get a little bit iffy. If nothing else, they just also become unappetizing when they've sat in your fridge for that long. But I go back to the same, using your eyes, use your nose. Things don't, again, magically grow food diseases if they're not touching anything else, but molds and weird things can kind of grow on there. 7 days or less, but aim to eat them, I would say, in 4, because you want them to be appetizing, and you can reinvent them in a shorter window in lots of different ways. And if you won't eat leftovers, learn to cut your recipes in half and just don't cook enough so that you have leftovers. You just be honest with yourself about which type of person you are, and then you take precautions at that time.
I think of when we talk about food waste, we always say, you know, waste is this social construct, right? So it's not waste until we decide it's waste. It's just food, right? I think of leftovers the same way, right? If you are looking forward to them and you're overproducing because there's nothing better than the rest of the whatever it is the next day, then there's no such thing as leftovers, right? It's just delicious food. So I think we are out of time. I guess, Alana, do you have a last word?
I just want to say thank you to Andrea, Allison, Brenda, and Jonathan. This was wonderful. I hope all the participants on this Friday afternoon learned something that they can take away and feel motivated to start to implement at home. We're going to be posting a list of resources on the website. So if you're wondering where all these URLs and sites and different tips are going to be, we'll go ahead and get that up there shortly, probably next week. And we look forward to hearing from all of you. So thank you, everyone.